Great. Okay. So you're talking about Trump aligning with Putin a lot more?
Yep, he does.
Look at this. The White House acknowledged that President Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin informally met in Buenos Aires at November's G20 summit. But a new report alleges their conversation was longer, more substantive, and included no American personnel. In November, Trump pointedly canceled his scheduled meeting with Putin.
Like a trend here.
Yeah.
Almost like a fear that the President of the United States, ever has an American listening to his conversations with Vladimir Putin.
Almost.
Okay, it happens all the time.
Okay. Yeah.
So in November, he canceled his meeting with Putin due to Russia's provocative capture of Ukrainian ships and sailors. Trump tweeted, "I look forward to a meaningful summit again as soon as this situation is resolved." But according to the Financial Times, the leaders huddled for several minutes at the end of an evening event with no translator or note taker from the U.S. side to record what was said.
And Susan, here's another thing. Why is it that the translators never from the American side? Why is it that if there is to be just one translator, it is always a translator for Vladimir Putin, but never a translator for the American side?
Because President Trump does not trust the intel community. He does not trust his own staff. I mean, this goes back to Jared Kushner wanting to back channel with the Russians right after the election. This is something he's always wanted to have, is an open line of communication. And he has now said, I will find it, and he doesn't care if he's not updating his security team or his intel team. And that's also what's so good about yesterday's hearing, is that those members of the intel community said, we are going to be honest, we are going to be straightforward with the American public, and we are not afraid of Donald Trump.
And they've lied time and time and time again. I remember, I mean, my God, and I've said this before, March of 2017, asking Mark Halperin, offset quietly all around, because this is when the whole Russia thing first started to percolate. I said, who's in trouble? He said, well, Don Jr. for one. And we all said, Don Jr. what? Does he not have a hunting license in Idaho? Right? But of course, you and Mark and some others did some extraordinary reporting about all these contacts with Russians that Donald Trump and the whole team have been lying about now for 2 years.
It's pretty amazing. I mean, just the extent of it, and we've seen reporting recently with just cataloging how much there's been. But just to go back to Susan's point a second ago, I put a slightly darker spin on this. Yeah, Donald Trump obviously doesn't trust his intelligence community. What is more, I think more precisely, Donald Trump doesn't want anybody on the American side to know what he's talking about with Vladimir Putin. There's a reason why American presidents, even in one-on-ones in the past, they do one-on-one meetings between presidents and other heads of state, they always have someone from their side there, because the rest of the government needs to know what's said in that meeting and to be able to keep later accounts of it honest from the other side. Trump did, for whatever reason, whatever he's talking about with with Vladimir Putin is stuff he does not want any American to know about.
And this happens.
And that raises all kinds of, I mean, it's a slightly chilling thing that this happens every time he meets with Putin. It's not reported initially, it's not read out to the press, and he has no one from the American government ever present. That pattern is truly unsettling, truly disturbing.
And Jim Vandehei, the pattern's been with us for a very long time. You remember when he invited in the foreign minister, the Russian foreign minister, and the Russian ambassador to the United States to brag about the fact that he had fired Jim Comey and that they didn't have anything to worry about anymore, that the pressure had been taken off of the Russian investigation. He excluded American reporters from that meeting, but allowed Russians in.
Yeah, and I got a lot of friends and family members who are like, well, wait, other presidents have done this. Didn't Obama do this one time with Putin? Like, no is the answer. I can't think of a single time in history that one of our leaders has met with an adversary multiple times where there's nobody on the American side taking any notes or there to tell other people in the government what actually transpired. And it's just plain weird. And you juxtapose that with what you guys were talking about at the top of the show, this idea that you have the intelligence community, the apparatus of the federal government, saying the opposite of what their boss says about ISIS or says about the threat of Russia. Again, that doesn't happen. It's never happened with this level of consistency where they break based on data and intelligence from what the president says rhetorically in public. Those two things, they might not be impeachable and they might not be enough to move Trump voters, but they are just plain weird and they break from historical precedent.
So the report, not independent.
Well, really quickly,
yeah.
And this isn't like Obama's deep state.
No.
These are all Republicans, all appointed by Donald Trump. Christopher Wray, as we heard yesterday, was suggested by Governor Chris Christie. Gina Haspel, sure as hell, was not a Democratic pick.
Yeah.
Gina Haspel was a Republican pick. She's now running the CIA. Dan Coates, Republican senator, Republican ambassador, Republican through and through, also picked by Donald Trump, confirmed by. These are all Republicans who are saying that what the president's telling you is just a lie.
Yeah.
What the president is telling you is not what's happening in the world. And it's happening time and time again. Even the DHS secretary said that Vladimir Putin and Russia posed a direct threat to American democracy. She said it under testimony. She said it on Capitol Hill. I mean, seriously? He just keeps denying and denying and denying what everybody in his government and in the military are saying.
So some more details from this report, not independently confirmed by NBC News, cites people who had direct knowledge of the encounter or were briefed on it, and claims the discussion occurred at a theater as world leaders and their spouses were guests were streaming out of the building. The Financial Times claims President Trump was accompanied by his wife Melania, but no staff, while Putin was flanked by his translator. The four of them sat at a table and were among the last to leave. A Russian government official tells the Financial Times that the two leaders spoke for about 15 minutes about a number of foreign policy issues, including the sea incident with Ukraine and the conflict in Syria. They also discussed when they could have a formal meeting, the official said. The White House declined further comment. This is incredible.
And 15 minutes of a meeting pales in comparison to what we've seen before. 2 hours at Helsinki, 2 hours together, these two men with only translators. No national security advisor, no Secretary of State, to be next to Donald Trump. Think of those two narrators in that meeting coming out of it, Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin, trying to explain what exactly happened, and no real account of what happened in that room. Imagine you were President Trump. Imagine you were a person under investigation for working with Russia, having your campaign work with Russia. What would you do just as a PR matter? Wouldn't you have as many people in that room as you could? If you were out in public sitting in a room, wouldn't you have translators and advisors
for your country,
to say, no, of course I
flipped.
don't have some strange private relationship with Vladimir Putin. It's all out in the open. He's doing the exact opposite of what he said.
And not only
Guys.
that, the story's sourced by a Russian official.
Right.
This wasn't coming from U.S. sources. I mean, this is Russia saying we are actually going to interfere even more with this president by doing this.
And what, John Heilman, what this shows us is that, again, the Russians, at every one of these meetings, have all the readouts.
Right.
They know what goes on in these meetings so they can prepare for the future. I mean, I love what Jim Vandehei said, is relatives ask, well, this happens all the time, right? No, this never happens. No. This never happens. Never happens repeatedly like this, especially. It keeps happening. And so usually the president's not allowed to talk to anybody without having somebody there, without getting the full notes back to the State Department, back to the National Security Advisor, so they can plan their strategy towards a country that sees the United States of America as an enemy. Right. We may see the Russians as an adversary. Vladimir Putin sees America as an enemy.
Well, and also they're there for another reason, right? If you think about the Russians reading out their versions of events, Donald Trump's in no position to dispute anything that the Russian side says. The Russian side can claim anything it wants to claim. And Trump stands up and says, well, that didn't happen in the meeting. Now, he's never done that. But if he ever did, found himself in a situation where the Russian side spun a meeting in a certain way, the president would stand up and say, well, that didn't happen. But he has no recourse to any other person who was there. He can't say, well, we have notes from the meeting. My national security advisor was there. Of course, I never said this. He's in a position where now he's vulnerable to Russian spin, to Russian misinformation. He puts himself willingly in a position where he can be publicly and privately manipulated by Vladimir Putin. And he does it over and over again. For what reason? Again, this brings us back to the large questions here. What is it that Vladimir Putin has on Donald Trump that compels him to allow for Vladimir Putin to call the shots on how these meetings are set up, and why does Donald Trump capitulate over and over and over again? What's there?
And what is there that has him going up to lecterns in Helsinki, as we're seeing right here, where Donald Trump says, I take the word of an ex-KGB agent over my own handpicked FBI director, over my own handpicked CIA director, over my own handpicked director of national intelligence, over my own handpicked chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, over my own handpicked national security establishment, over my own handpicked Secretary of State. You can go down the list. And Jim Vandehei, I'm just wondering, you're talking about your relatives. I could talk about my relatives. We could all talk about our relatives when issues like this come up. I mean, I just wonder how voters, especially in your home state of Wisconsin, which seems to me to be sort of the Florida of 2020. It is really the state that determines whether Donald Trump has any chance of repeating again in 2020. What are people in Wisconsin saying? I mean, how do they square up the fact that Donald Trump is siding with Vladimir Putin on issues regarding Russia and Syria and Iran and North Korea and Ukraine over the FBI director, the CIA director, the director of national intelligence, and all these Republican hand-picked Donald Trump appointees?
I mean, there's not a ton of evidence that Trump's losing that much support from his base. So I don't know that they're watching this like we are and saying, oh, my gosh, I'm connecting these dots and therefore I don't want to support Donald Trump.
Shouldn't they?
But something that has...
But I mean, shouldn't they?
Definitely, they should be. I mean, again, like, you could watch the first 15 minutes and say, geez, you guys are all very conspiratorial. There's nothing we've talked about that's not just fact so far. Another fact would be, look what happened on Capitol Hill, I think yesterday, where you have Republicans now saying that it actually would be dangerous to do what Donald Trump said in Syria. Well, who wants us to get out of Syria precipitously? Vladimir Putin. That's about it. He may be Turkey, right? There's a few others that want us out precipitously. His own national security team is saying, wait a second, you shouldn't do that, can't do that. Republicans on the Hill who tend to back him on anything are saying, no, we don't agree with you on that either. And you do have to pay attention to these things. Like, yes, maybe they're not all linked, but they're all so counter to how we've done business in Washington and in government that you have to zero in on it and start to ask those questions. Why? Go back, you're talking about what does Vladimir Putin have over Trump? And that used to be very conspiratorial when people would say it. We now know, if you listen to Rudy Giuliani, if you listen to people in the White House, there was activity going on, a potential business deal throughout the campaign for Trump to have a large property in Moscow. There was coordination between Michael Cohen, his right-hand person, and Moscow. Moscow knew that. Putin knew that. Putin knows every single thing that happens in Russia, every contact that's happening with him. So that is at least one thing you'd have dangling over him.
And it is. There are so many coincidences. If you're sitting at a craps table and somebody rolls snake eyes once, but if they do it like 47 times in a row, the die are loaded, right? Anybody here watch?
It's very concerning.
Anybody here watch Sherlock?
Yeah.
Right? There's that amazing scene where Mycroft is yelling inside of Sherlock's brain, Mycroft, the older brother who he's so intimidated by, and he says, and what do we say about coincidences, Sherlock? And Sherlock responds, the universe is rarely so lazy.
Exactly.
These are not coincidences. And you can go all the way back to Donald Trump on this show in December of 2015,
That's right.
Yeah.
saying that Vladimir Putin was a stronger leader than American leaders, and he didn't care that he assassinated people, that U.S. troops in Iraq killed people too. Go back to that, and it's one after another example. After a while, the coincidences, there is no explanation here. And again, on what Vladimir Putin wants the most? Taking over the Middle East? Like getting the United States out of Syria? Donald Trump is the only person in Washington, D.C., other than Rand Paul, and he doesn't really count anyway, does he, that wants us out of Syria.
And the only thing I keep coming back to, it's not an American first policy, it's a Donald Trump first policy.
It's a Russia first policy.
Always, and it is
yeah.
always about Donald Trump. It always comes back to that. Anytime you want to know why does he have a secret one-on-one with Vladimir Putin or does any of the things he does it because it is in his best interest. And hopefully we will learn more about what those interests are.
All right, Jim Vandehei, thank you very much. And
Would
still
you like
ahead,
to send you the calendar?
And still ahead on Morning Joe,
Send
new
us all the
polling
calendar.
says that voters have more faith in Democrats than the president and Republicans, including over border security.
And more confidence in Nancy Pelosi.
Absolutely.
Than Donald Trump.
Nancy wins big time on that one.
Running against Nancy Pelosi, that really worked for you Republicans really well last time. Try that again.
Plus, Senator Elizabeth Warren takes on the wealthiest people in America, and they are freaking out. That includes former Starbucks CEO Howard Schultz, who'll be our guest this morning. But first,
thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.